The stars rippled like water as the massive ships tore through space itself and emerged at the edge of the solar system. 12 enormous vessels appeared first, each one larger than any city on Earth. Their hulls a strange mix of metal and something that looked almost alive. Behind them came 40 smaller ships, but even these smaller craft were the size of aircraft carriers. The fleet hung in the darkness of space, their alien shapes blocking out distant stars as they powered up their scanning systems and began to search for their target. Commander Vrektal stood in the command chamber of his flagship, his 4 eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed a small blue and green planet in the distance. His clawed hands rested on the organic controls that connected directly to the ship's nervous system. For 3,000 years, his people had traveled the galaxy, hunting primitive species and taking them as slaves. The Zitharans were the most feared slavers in known space, and with good reason. They had perfected their craft over countless worlds, and they had never once failed to capture their prey. The intelligence data had been clear. This planet called Earth was home to billions of primitive creatures who called themselves humans. The Zitharans had been watching them for decades through long-range probes and spy satellites. The humans had barely begun to explore their own solar system. They had sent a few primitive rockets to their moon and had established some basic satellites around their planet. Their weapons were chemical-based projectiles and simple explosives. They had no energy shields, no plasma weapons, and no faster-than-light travel. They would be perfect slaves, strong enough to work but too primitive to resist. Vrektal felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. His crew was already preparing the capture nets and paralysis beams. The smaller hunting vessels were being loaded with soldiers who would descend to the surface and begin rounding up the humans. They would target the major cities first, where the population was densest. Within a week, they would have millions of slaves secured in the holding ships. Within a month, the entire planet would be stripped of its most valuable resource, and the Zitharans would move on to their next target. High above Earth, in a rotating station that had been in orbit for 12 years, Captain Jake Morrison was having a very different reaction to the sensor readings on his screen. He had been expecting this moment for most of his adult life, but now that it was here, he felt his heart racing. His hand moved to the communication panel and he opened a secure channel to the command center, deep underground in North America. The words came out calm and steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Contact confirmed. 12 large vessels and 40 small ones. Distance is holding at outer solar system boundary. They are scanning us now. Admiral Lisa Crawford received the message in the command center beneath the mountain. Around her, dozens of officers worked at their stations watching screens that showed information no civilian would believe existed. She had spent 20 years preparing for this day, ever since she had been read into the program as a young officer fresh out of the academy. The program that had started in 1947, when a Zitharan scout ship had crashed in the desert near a small town called Roswell. The crash had not been an accident. It had been a survey mission, and the aliens inside had survived long enough to be interrogated before their biology failed in Earth's atmosphere. From that crash, humanity had learned 2 critical things. First, that they were not alone in the universe. Second, that the universe was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The alien survivors had eventually shared information about their mission, about the slaver empires that roamed the stars, about Earth being marked as a target for future harvesting. The governments of the world had made a choice that day. They would prepare. They would build. They would hide their true capabilities until the moment the hunters arrived. 78 years had passed since that crash. 78 years of reverse engineering alien technology, of building weapons in secret, of constructing ships in hidden bases on the dark side of the moon where no telescope could see them. 78 years of training soldiers for a war that might never come. But now it was here, and humanity was ready. Admiral Crawford looked at the holographic display that showed the positions of everything in near-Earth space. The aliens could see the obvious things, the civilian satellites that broadcast television signals and weather data, the International Space Station that housed rotating crews of astronauts, the few orbital platforms that appeared to be scientific research facilities. What they could not see were the weapons platforms disguised as space debris, the railgun installations hidden in the hulls of apparently defunct satellites, the sensor arrays that had been tracking their approach since they first entered the solar system. They could not see the 30 warships waiting in the shadow of the moon, their hulls coated in stealth materials that made them invisible to sensors. She opened a channel to every military base on the planet, to every ship waiting in space, to every soldier who had trained for this moment. Her voice was clear and strong. "This is Crawford. Condition Alpha is confirmed. All units are to hold current positions. Let them come closer. Let them think we are helpless. When they commit to their attack, we spring the trap. Remember your training. Remember what we are fighting for. Humanity will not be prey. We will show these hunters what it means to attack Earth." The Zitharan fleet began to move forward, their engines creating ripples in space as they accelerated toward the blue planet. Vrechtel ordered his ships into a standard approach formation. The dreadnoughts would remain in high orbit to provide fire support if needed, while the hunting vessels would descend to the atmosphere and begin their work. He expected no resistance. Every species they had encountered before had either surrendered immediately or fought with such primitive weapons that they posed no real threat. As the alien fleet drew closer to Earth, millions of people on the surface moved into underground shelters that had been prepared over decades. Cities that had seemed normal just hours before were now empty, their streets cleared, their buildings abandoned. It looked like humanity had fled in panic, exactly what the Zitharans expected. But in reality, it was a careful withdrawal, a strategic repositioning. The empty cities were not signs of fear, but carefully prepared battlegrounds. Jake Morrison watched the alien fleet approach his station and felt a cold smile cross his face. The station appeared unarmed, a simple research platform with no military value. The aliens would ignore it. They had no idea that inside its hull were plasma cannon batteries powerful enough to crack their ships open like eggs. He checked his weapons one last time and waited for the order to fire. The wait was almost over. The hunting vessels separated from the main fleet like wasps leaving a nest, their engines burning bright as they descended toward Earth's atmosphere. Commander Vrechtel watched from his flagship as 40 craft made their approach to the major population centers his scans had identified. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Beijing, Delhi, and dozens of other cities were targeted. Each hunting vessel carried 200 soldiers and enough equipment to capture and hold tens of thousands of slaves. The paralysis beams would freeze the humans where they stood, and the capture nets would scoop them up like fish from a barrel. The first hunting vessel entered Earth's atmosphere over what the humans called New York City. The pilot brought the ship down slowly, expecting to see streets filled with panicking primitives running in every direction. Instead, the streets below were completely empty. Not a single vehicle moved on the roads. Not a single human could be seen anywhere. The pilot reported this to his commander, who dismissed it as simple fear. The primitives had probably hidden in their buildings. It would make the capture slightly more difficult, but not by much. The hunting vessel settled into a landing position in the center of the city, its massive bulk crushing several abandoned vehicles beneath its weight. The cargo doors opened and soldiers began to pour out, their weapons ready, their eyes scanning for targets. They moved in standard formation, spreading out to cover the area. They had done this 1,000 times on 100 different worlds. But something felt wrong. The city was too quiet. The buildings were too empty. It felt less like a population center and more like a trap. That feeling was proven right 3 seconds later when the entire city erupted with weapons fire. What had appeared to be normal office buildings suddenly revealed themselves as hidden fortifications. The glass windows shattered as railgun batteries opened fire from inside, sending tungsten projectiles through the air at impossible speeds. The Zitharan shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, were completely useless against solid metal, traveling at hypersonic velocities. The first wave of soldiers fell before they even understood what was hitting them. From a parking structure 2 blocks away, plasma batteries that had been hidden beneath false concrete panels began firing. The green energy bolt struck the hunting vessel's hull and melted through the organic armor like a blowtorch through butter. Inside the ship, crew members screamed as the atmosphere vented into space. The pilot tried to lift off to get back into orbit where they would be safe, but the engines had already been damaged. The massive ship tilted to one side and crashed into a building, sending debris cascading down into the streets. All across Earth, the same scene played out in every city the aliens had targeted. In London, hidden anti-aircraft batteries destroyed 3 hunting vessels before they could even land. In Tokyo, the aliens found themselves facing powered armor suits that the humans had built using reverse-engineered technology. In Moscow, the ground itself exploded beneath the alien ships as underground charges were detonated. The hunters had walked into prepared kill zones and humanity was showing no mercy. Captain Jake Morrison watched the slaughter on his screens and felt a grim satisfaction. The aliens had expected helpless prey, but they were learning a hard lesson. He opened a communication channel to Admiral Crawford. Ground defenses are performing beyond expectations. Enemy landing parties are taking heavy casualties. The dreadnoughts in orbit are beginning to react. They are powering up their weapons and turning toward Earth. I think they are preparing for orbital bombardment. Admiral Crawford had expected this. When a predator realizes its prey has teeth, it gets angry. She gave the order that she had been holding in reserve. All orbital units, this is Crawford. Activate weapons. Engage enemy capital ships. Show them what happens when you threaten Earth. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Around the planet, dozens of satellites that had appeared to be nothing more than space junk suddenly came to life. Solar panels unfolded into weapon arrays. Stealth coatings deactivated. Targeting systems locked onto the Zythran dreadnoughts. The first volley caught the aliens completely by surprise. Plasma bolts and railgun rounds struck their ships from every direction. The Zytharans had shields, but they were designed for ship-to-ship combat where attacks came from predictable angles. They were not prepared for a three-dimensional ambush from weapons platforms they had not even known existed. Shields collapsed under the sustained fire. Hulls cracked and split. One dreadnought lost its main reactor and exploded in a ball of blue fire that lit up the darkness of space like a second sun. Rektal stared at his tactical display in complete shock and disbelief. This was impossible. The humans were primitives. They should not have weapons like this. They should not have been able to hide this much military capability. His ship shuddered as another volley struck the shields and warning lights began flashing across every console. He opened a communication channel to his fleet and ordered them to retreat to a higher orbit, to regroup and reassess the situation. But before the order could be carried out, something even worse appeared on his sensors. From behind Earth's moon, 30 ships emerged into open space. They were sleek and deadly, their hulls a combination of human and alien design. At the front of the formation was a massive battleship that made even the Zytharan dreadnoughts look small by comparison. Its name was written in human letters across its hull, Defiance. Captain Greg Palmer stood on its bridge and gave the order to fire. The main guns of the Defiance spoke, and magnetic accelerator cannons sent rounds downrange at a fraction of the speed of light. The Zytharan fleet tried to scatter, tried to break formation and escape, but they were boxed in. Human ships were above them, below them on every side. The orbital platforms continued their relentless fire. Fighter craft began launching from the human capital ships, small and agile vessels that swarmed around the alien dreadnoughts like angry insects. The pilots had trained for years in simulators based on captured alien technology. They knew where to aim, where the weak points were, where a well-placed shot could cripple an entire ship. Lieutenant Danny Wright led his squadron through the chaos of the battle, his fingers dancing across the controls of his fighter. He targeted the bioneural clusters on the enemy ships, the organic nerve centers that controlled their weapons and navigation. His missiles struck true and entire sections of the alien dreadnought went dark. Around him, his wingmen were doing the same, each pilot executing the tactics they had practiced countless times. The Zytharans were good fighters, but they were predictable. Humanity had studied them for 78 years and knew every pattern, every weakness, every tactical doctrine they used. On the ground, the surviving alien soldiers were trying to retreat back to their ships, but found themselves cut off. Human soldiers in advanced combat armor moved through the streets, their weapons methodical and precise. The aliens were bigger and stronger, but the humans were faster and smarter. Sergeant Chris Murphy cornered a group of 5 alien soldiers in an alley and watched as they raised their weapons. He did not give them a chance to fire. His squad opened up with armor-piercing rounds and plasma rifles, and the aliens fell one by one. By the end of the first day, the Zytharan fleet was in ruins. 6 dreadnoughts had been destroyed outright. 3 more were crippled and drifting. The hunting vessels had fared even worse, with only 7 remaining intact. The aliens tried to jump to hyperspace, tried to escape back to their territory, but nothing happened. Their jump drives activated, but no portal opened. Vrektal realized with growing horror that the humans had found a way to block hyperspace travel. They were trapped. Commander Vrektal felt something he had not experienced in his entire life. genuine fear. His flagship was heavily damaged, atmosphere venting from 3 different hull breaches, and half his crew was dead or dying. The tactical display showed the remains of his once mighty fleet, scattered across Earth's orbital space like broken toys. The humans were not supposed to be capable of this. Every piece of intelligence, every survey, every scan, had indicated they were a primitive species barely capable of chemical rockets. But the weapons he was facing now were as advanced as anything in Zetheran space, perhaps even more advanced. He pulled up the records from the scout ship that had crashed on this planet decades ago. That ship had been sent to mark this world for future harvesting. It had transmitted its findings before it went down. A species in its early industrial age, no energy weapons, no space military, no threat whatsoever. But now Rektal understood the terrible truth. The humans had captured that ship. They had studied it. They had learned from it. And they had been preparing for this moment ever since. The human fighter craft were everywhere now, moving in patterns that seemed impossible to predict. Lieutenant Danny Wright brought his squadron around for another attack run on the remaining dreadnoughts, his targeting computer locked onto the exposed reactor ports of a Zetheran ship that had lost most of its armor plating. He fired his missiles and watched as they streaked through space and punched into the heart of the enemy vessel. The reactor went critical, and the entire ship exploded from the inside out, debris spreading across kilometers of space. Captain Greg Palmer watched the battle from the bridge of the Defiance and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The enemy fleet was broken. They had no escape. But he knew this was just the beginning. His orders from Admiral Crawford were clear. Leave none of the slaver ships operational. Take prisoners if possible. But the priority was to ensure that not a single alien vessel survived to report back what had happened here. Earth needed time to prepare for what would come next. Time to build more ships and train more soldiers before the rest of the slaver empires learned what humanity was capable of. On the ground, the battle had shifted from defense to offense. Colonel Amy Harrison commanded the 1st Mobile Infantry Division as they moved through New York City, systematically hunting down every alien soldier that had landed. The Zitherans were formidable warriors in their own right. They stood over 8 feet tall, their bodies covered in natural armor plates that could deflect small arms fire. Their claws could tear through steel, but they had never faced an enemy like humanity. The human soldiers moved in coordinated teams, using tactics that combined centuries of military experience with technology that matched or exceeded what the aliens possessed. When the Zetherans tried to use their superior strength, the humans kept their distance and used ranged weapons. When the aliens tried to retreat, the humans cut off their escape routes. When the aliens tried to hide, thermal imaging and motion sensors found them. The battle was less a fight and more an extermination. Sergeant Chris Murphy led his squad through the remains of Times Square, stepping over the bodies of alien soldiers who had learned too late that humans were not prey. His helmet display showed movement in a building 3 blocks ahead. He signaled his team and they moved into position. The alien inside was wounded and alone, separated from its unit. It raised its weapon when the humans appeared, but Murphy was faster. His plasma rifle fired once and the alien collapsed. In orbit, the Zetheran dreadnought Eternal Hunger tried one final desperate maneuver. Its commander ordered all remaining power diverted to engines, hoping to ram the human battleship and at least take some of the enemy with them. Captain Morrison saw the maneuver on his tactical display and almost laughed at the desperation of it. He ordered his weapons batteries to concentrate fire on the charging dreadnought. Railguns spoke in rapid sequence, tearing massive holes in the alien ship's hull. The Eternal Hunger broke apart before it could close half the distance, its pieces scattering like leaves in the wind. Dr. Helen Price watched the battle from the safety of the underground command center, her eyes focused on the readouts from the hyperspace inhibitor network. The system she had spent 15 years developing was working perfectly. Every time the aliens tried to open a jump portal, the inhibitor field collapsed it before it could stabilize. The Zetherans were trapped in normal space with no way to call for help and no way to escape. It was exactly what humanity needed. Admiral Crawford reviewed the battle reports as they came in and felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The enemy fleet was down to 5 operational ships, and those were surrounded by overwhelming human forces. Ground casualties had been minimal thanks to the civilian evacuation and the prepared defenses. The trap had worked better than anyone had dared to hope. But she knew they could not become overconfident. This was just one fleet, one group of slavers. There were others out there, and when this fleet failed to report back, questions would be asked. She opened a communication channel to all human forces. "All units, this is Admiral Crawford. You have performed magnificently today. The enemy is broken but not yet defeated. Continue operations until every hostile vessel is neutralized or surrendered. And remember, we are not just fighting for Earth today. We are sending a message to the galaxy. Humanity will not be prey. Humanity will not kneel. Humanity will fight and we will win." Major Kyle Bennett coordinated the orbital defense network from Luna Base, watching as the human ships pressed their advantage. The moon base had been built in secret over 20 years, hidden in a crater on the far side where Earth telescopes could never see it. From here, dozens of warships had been constructed using materials mined from asteroids and technology reverse-engineered from the crashed scout ship. The base represented humanity's greatest secret and greatest achievement. He tracked the movements of the remaining Zitharan ships and saw that they were trying to form up, trying to create a defensive formation that might buy them time. He ordered the orbital platforms to adjust their fire patterns and cut off that possibility. Tungsten rounds and plasma bolts rained down on the alien vessels from every angle. Shields that were already weakened collapsed entirely. Hulls that had been damaged took more punishment. One by one, the alien ships went dark. Lieutenant Sophie Chang worked in the intelligence section of the command center, monitoring every communication the aliens were sending. Most of it was encrypted, but humanity had broken their codes years ago. She listened as the Zitharan commanders called desperately for reinforcements, for support, for any help at all. But no help was coming. The hyperspace inhibitor made sure of that. She flagged several important transmissions for analysis, including one that seemed to contain data about other slaver fleets operating in nearby sectors. The Battle of New York was over within 4 hours of the initial landing. Every alien soldier who had set foot in the city was dead or captured. The hunting vessel that had crashed was being swarmed by human engineers who were already beginning to strip it down for study. Similar scenes played out in every city the aliens had targeted. The ground invasion had been a complete and total disaster for the Zitharans. In space, the final 3 operational dreadnoughts made one last attempt to break through the human lines. They concentrated all their remaining weapons on a single human cruiser, hoping to overwhelm its shields and create a gap they could escape through. Captain Morrison watched the attack coming and calmly ordered his ships to adjust their formation. The cruiser they were targeting pulled back while 2 battleships moved forward to take its place. The alien weapons fire splashed harmlessly against military-grade shields that had been designed specifically to withstand this kind of assault. The human counterfire was devastating. Magnetic accelerator cannons fired in sequence, each shot precisely calculated to strike at the weakest points in the alien armor. The first dreadnought lost its engines and went into an uncontrolled spin. The second took a direct hit to its command center and went silent. The third tried to surrender, broadcasting ceasefire signals in a dozen languages. Admiral Crawford ordered the human forces to hold fire and accept the surrender, but to keep weapons locked on target just in case it was a trick. Commander Rektal sat in the ruins of his command chamber and realized that everything he had known was wrong. The Zitharans had been the apex predators of the galaxy for thousands of years. They had conquered and enslaved hundreds of species. They had never met a foe they could not defeat. But humanity had beaten them in less than 2 days. His fleet was destroyed. His soldiers were dead. His empire would consider him a failure, assuming he lived long enough to face their judgment. The second day of the battle began with the Zitharans attempting a desperate strategy. Commander Vrektal, his options exhausted and his fleet in ruins, ordered his 3 remaining functional ships to target Earth's cities directly with orbital bombardment. If he could not capture the humans as slaves, then he would at least hurt them before his defeat was complete. He knew it was a violation of the slaver codes that destroying potential merchandise was considered wasteful, but he was beyond caring about such rules now. The primitives had humiliated him, and he wanted revenge. The bombardment weapons on the Zitharan dreadnoughts were designed to crack planetary shields and destroy military installations. Each shot carried enough energy to level several city blocks. Vrektal targeted the largest population centers and gave the order to fire. Massive energy beams lanced down from orbit, burning through the atmosphere toward targets below. For a moment it seemed like the humans had made a fatal mistake in their defense planning, but only for a moment. Major Kyle Bennett had been waiting for exactly this move. From his position on Luna Base, he had been watching the alien ships closely, monitoring their power signatures and weapon configurations. The moment the bombardment weapons began to charge, he activated the orbital defense grid that had been positioned around every major city on Earth. Point defense lasers and anti-missile systems that had been hidden among the commercial satellites came to life instantly. The Zetheran energy beams met a wall of defensive fire that intercepted them thousands of kilometers above their targets. Counter beams canceled out the bombardment shots in spectacular explosions of light and energy. Kinetic interceptors destroyed the few physical projectiles the aliens tried to launch. Every single shot the Zetherans fired was stopped before it could reach the atmosphere. The bombardment turned into an expensive and pointless light show that accomplished nothing except wasting the aliens' remaining ammunition. Admiral Crawford watched the failed bombardment from her command center and felt a cold anger settle over her. The aliens had just tried to murder millions of civilians. Whatever mercy she might have been willing to show was gone now. She opened a secure channel to Captain Morrison. The enemy has just attempted to commit mass murder. No more restraint. Destroy the remaining hostile vessels. Leave only the command ship intact for intelligence purposes. Captain Jake Morrison received the order and felt no hesitation in carrying it out. His station, Sentinel Prime, had been positioned in orbit specifically to defend against this kind of attack. The plasma cannon batteries that had been hidden in the station's hull were the most powerful weapons humanity had ever built. Each battery drew power from a fusion reactor that had been running silently for 12 years, waiting for this moment. He targeted the nearest Zetheran dreadnought and fired. The plasma bolt struck the alien ship with the force of a small star. The bioorganic armor that had protected Zetheran vessels for thousands of years simply vaporized under the sustained fire. The ship's hull cracked open like an egg, spilling atmosphere and crew into the void of space. The second dreadnought tried to turn and face this new threat. But before it could bring its weapons to bear, 3 human cruisers emerged from behind Earth's moon and opened fire with everything they had. Lieutenant Danny Wright and his fighter squadron were given new orders: disable the command ship, but keep it intact. It was a delicate mission that required precision flying and perfect timing. He led his squadron in close, dodging point defense fire from the alien ship, and began targeting specific systems. His missiles took out the engine controls. His wingmen destroyed the weapons arrays. Within 15 minutes, the Zetheran flagship was drifting helplessly in space, unable to move or fight. On the ground, Colonel Amy Harrison shifted from defensive operations to full offense. Her mobile infantry divisions were now hunting down every alien soldier that remained on Earth. The Zetharans had scattered after their initial landing attempts failed, trying to hide in the abandoned cities and wait for rescue that would never come. But there was nowhere to hide from the human forces. Thermal imaging satellites tracked their heat signatures. Motion sensors picked up their movements. Drones with advanced AI systems searched every building and alley. The alien warriors fought with desperate courage, but courage was not enough against an enemy that had every advantage. In Chicago, a group of 30 Zetheran soldiers tried to fortify a position in an office complex. Human artillery simply brought the building down on top of them. In Los Angeles, alien forces attempted to use captured human civilians as hostages. Snipers with enhanced targeting systems took them out from a kilometer away. In Paris, the last major group of aliens tried to storm a military checkpoint. Automated defense systems cut them down before they got within 100 meters. Sergeant Chris Murphy and his squad cleared an apartment building floor by floor, checking every room for alien stragglers. On the 14th floor, they found 3 Zetheran soldiers who had been wounded in the initial fighting and left behind by their retreating forces. The aliens were in bad shape, their natural armor cracked and broken, leaking fluid from multiple wounds. One of them tried to raise a weapon, but Murphy was faster. He fired a single shot that knocked the weapon from the alien's clawed hand without killing it. The standing orders were to take prisoners when possible. The intelligence value of captured aliens was enormous. Murphy's squad secured the 3 wounded Zetherans and called for medical evacuation. Within 10 minutes, a military transport arrived and took the prisoners to a secure facility, where doctors who had studied alien biology would keep them alive long enough to be interrogated. It was more mercy than the Zetharans had shown to the countless species they had enslaved over the centuries. Lieutenant Sophie Chang made the breakthrough that would change everything. Working in the intelligence section, she had been analyzing the data pulled from damaged alien computer systems and intercepted communications. Most of it was routine military traffic, but one particular data cache caught her attention. It was a navigation database that contained the locations of every known Zitharan base and outpost. More importantly, it contained information about other slaver species operating in the same region of space. She brought the data to Admiral Crawford immediately. The Admiral reviewed the information with growing interest. The database showed the positions of slave processing centers, the routes of other slaver fleets, and even intelligence about species that the Zitharans considered potential competitors or threats. It was a roadmap to the entire slaver network in this sector of the galaxy. With this information, humanity would not just be able to defend themselves. They would be able to go on the offensive. Crawford called an emergency meeting of the military command staff and political leaders who had been read into the program. They gathered in the secure conference room deep beneath the mountain, watching as Sophie presented her findings on holographic displays. The scope of the slaver operations was staggering. Dozens of species were involved in the trade, capturing and selling sentient beings across hundreds of worlds. But the database also showed something else. Resistance movements, escaped slave populations, and even a few species that had managed to fight off slaver attacks. President Nicole Hayes listened to the briefing and made a decision that would define humanity's role in the galaxy. We cannot keep this information to ourselves. If there are other species out there fighting against the slavers, we need to help them. Earth has proven that the slavers can be beaten. Now we need to prove that we are willing to stand with anyone who fights for freedom. I want plans drawn up for offensive operations against the slaver networks. The meeting continued for hours as military planners began to outline what such operations would look like. The consensus was clear. Humanity had won a defensive victory, but they could not stop there. The Zitharans would eventually send more ships to investigate why this fleet had gone silent. Other slaver species would learn about Earth sooner or later. The only way to ensure humanity's safety was to take the fight to the enemy, to dismantle the slaver networks before they could organize a larger attack. Captain Greg Palmer volunteered to lead the first offensive fleet. His battleship Defiance and a task force of cruisers and destroyers would venture beyond the solar system for the first time in human history. Their mission would be to locate and liberate the nearest slave processing center, which, according to the captured database, was located only 15 light-years away. It would be dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was also necessary. Dr. Helen Price was already working on the next generation of human ships. The hyperspace inhibitor technology could be miniaturized and installed on individual vessels, allowing human fleets to trap enemy ships wherever they found them. The weapon systems could be refined and made more efficient. The armor and shields could be improved. Humanity had proven they could fight, but now they needed to prove they could win consistently. As the second day ended, the battle for Earth was essentially over. 5 Zitharan ships remained, one of which was the captured command vessel. The rest had been destroyed, their debris forming a ring around Earth that would be visible from the surface for years to come. On the 5th day after the initial invasion, Commander Vrektal transmitted his unconditional surrender from the crippled bridge of his flagship. His ship was surrounded by human vessels. His weapons were destroyed, his engines were offline, and his crew was either dead or dying. Of the 52 ships that had arrived at Earth with such confidence, only his command ship and 4 heavily damaged escorts remained. The rest were wreckage floating, in orbit or scattered across the surface of a planet that had proven to be far more dangerous than anyone in the Zitharan Empire could have imagined. Admiral Lisa Crawford received the surrender transmission and felt no satisfaction from it. Too many humans had died in the fighting despite all the preparation and defensive advantages. Hundreds of soldiers had fallen in the ground battles. 2 orbital platforms had been destroyed. A cruiser had been crippled and 30 crew members were dead. It was a light price compared to what could have been, but every death was a person who would never go home. She ordered the human fleet to secure the surviving alien vessels and prepare to board them. Captain Jake Morrison led the boarding party that secured Rektal's flagship. His Marines moved through the alien ship with weapons ready, encountering no resistance. The surviving Zitharan crew members were too injured or too demoralized to fight. They simply raised their clawed hands in surrender as the humans swept through the ship. Morrison found Rectile in the command chamber, the alien commander sitting in his organic control chair with his 4 eyes staring at nothing. The alien spoke in broken English, learned from the databases his people had compiled about Earth. "You were supposed to be primitives. Our scans showed no advanced technology. How did you hide all of this from us?" Morrison felt no sympathy for the creature that had come to enslave billions of people. "We had 78 years to prepare. One of your scout ships crashed on our planet in 1947. We learned about you, about your empire, about your intentions, and we decided that we would never be anyone's slaves. The interrogation of the captured Zitherans took place in secure facilities deep underground. Teams of linguists and intelligence officers worked around the clock to extract every piece of useful information from the prisoners. The aliens were surprisingly cooperative once they understood that humanity was not going to simply execute them. They provided details about the slaver networks, about the political structures of their empire, about the military capabilities of other species. The information was invaluable and confirmed much of what had been found in the captured databases. On the surface, the cities that had been evacuated began to see their populations return. The cleanup operations would take months, but people were eager to reclaim their homes. The destroyed alien vessels were already being hauled away for study. Human engineers were going to take apart every piece of technology and learn from it. The bioorganic systems the Zitherans used were particularly interesting, offering possibilities for new medical treatments and biological computers. President Nicole Hayes addressed the world from the United Nations building in New York, standing in front of representatives from every nation. The speech was broadcast live to every corner of the planet and translated into every language. Behind her, on enormous screens, footage of the battle played on repeat. People watched as human ships destroyed the alien fleet, as soldiers fought to defend their cities, as a species that had come to enslave humanity was defeated decisively. Her voice was strong and clear as she spoke. 5 days ago, an alien fleet arrived at Earth with the intention of enslaving our entire species. They came expecting to find a primitive world, helpless and defenseless. What they found instead was humanity united, prepared and ready to fight. We have proven that Earth will not be prey. We have proven that when humanity stands together, we are unstoppable. But this victory is only the beginning. The aliens who attacked us are part of a larger network of slaver empires that span the galaxy. There are other species out there, innocent civilizations that are suffering under the same threat we just defeated. We cannot ignore their plight. We cannot hide in our solar system and hope the galaxy forgets about us. We must take action. The announcement that followed changed everything. Earth would be forming an interstellar defense force with the goal of dismantling the slaver networks. Ships were already being prepared for offensive operations. The military forces that had been hidden for decades would now step into the light. Humanity was going to take its place on the galactic stage not as victims but as liberators. Any species that wanted freedom would find an ally in Earth. Any species that participated in slavery would find an enemy. Captain Greg Palmer stood on the bridge of the Defiance as his ship prepared for departure. His task force consisted of 12 ships, a mix of battleships, cruisers, and support vessels. Their mission was to locate and liberate the slave processing center that the captured databases had identified. It would be the first time human ships had ventured beyond the solar system with hostile intent. The first time they would take the fight to the enemy, instead of waiting for the enemy to come to them. Admiral Crawford gave him his final orders over a secure channel. "You are venturing into unknown space with limited intelligence. The aliens you will encounter may be hostile, or they may be potential allies. Use your best judgment. Your primary objective is to free any slaves you find at that processing center. Your secondary objective is to gather intelligence about the slaver networks. And your third objective is to send a message. Let the galaxy know that humanity is here, that we are armed, and that we will not tolerate slavery in any form." The task force departed Earth orbit to cheers from the orbital platforms and stations. People watched from the surface as the ships activated their newly acquired faster-than-light drives, technology that had been reverse-engineered and improved upon over decades of secret research. The ships disappeared in flashes of light, jumping to hyperspace and leaving Earth behind. It was a historic moment, the first time humanity had reached for the stars with purpose and power. Lieutenant Sophie Chang continued her work in the Intelligence Division, analyzing the mountains of data that were still being extracted from captured alien systems. She discovered something that made her blood run cold. The Zytheran Empire had sent the fleet to Earth as a routine harvesting operation, expecting minimal resistance. But there were much larger fleets in reserve, hundreds of ships that could be mobilized if the Empire decided that humanity was a genuine threat. Earth had won this battle, but the war was far from over. She brought the information to Admiral Crawford immediately. The Admiral reviewed the data and nodded grimly. She had expected something like this. One victory did not mean safety. It meant humanity had announced its presence to a galaxy that was far more dangerous than most people realized. The shipyards on Luna Base and in orbit around Earth were already working at full capacity to build more vessels. Training centers were expanding to handle the flood of volunteers who wanted to join the defense forces. Dr. Helen Price made another breakthrough in her research. She had been studying the hyperspace technology from the captured ships and discovered a way to make it more efficient. Human ships would be able to travel faster and farther than the Zytheran vessels. Combined with the weapons advantages humanity already possessed, it would give Earth's forces a significant edge in any future conflicts. She immediately began working with the engineering teams to implement the improvements on all new ship construction. Major Kyle Bennett received orders to expand Luna Base and establish additional facilities in the asteroid belt. The hidden base had served its purpose, but now humanity needed more than secrecy. They needed production capacity on a scale that could compete with entire interstellar empires. Mining operations were established on several asteroids. Construction yards were built in stable orbits. Within a year, the plan was to have the capacity to produce one new warship every month. Sergeant Chris Murphy and his squad were awarded medals for their actions during the battle. They had personally eliminated over 40 alien soldiers and rescued a group of civilians who had been caught outside the evacuation zones. Murphy accepted the medal but told reporters that he was just doing his job. Every soldier who fought that day was a hero. We were all fighting for the same thing, to make sure that humanity would never bow to anyone. 3 weeks after the battle, Captain Palmer's task force arrived at the slave processing center. What they found there was horrific. Thousands of beings from a dozen different species were being held in cages, sorted by size and strength for sale to buyers across the galaxy. The facility was lightly defended, the slavers having never expected a military attack. The human ships destroyed the defense platforms within minutes and sent Marines to secure the facility. The freed slaves looked at their human rescuers with confusion and hope. Many of them had been in captivity for years, some for their entire lives. They had never seen their home worlds and did not know if their species still existed. Captain Palmer addressed them through translators, explaining that Earth had defeated a Zytheran fleet and was now working to dismantle the slaver networks. He offered them transport back to their home worlds if those worlds could be located.